black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson and I would like to welcome you to another discussion. I hope you will find interesting and put to rest some of these types of strange conversations I've been hearing on the internet for quite some time. That based on any kind of truth, but opinions. For the last couple of months, I've been trying to present some truths contrary to some of the things that I've been, again, hearing on the internet about who we are as people of African descent. But before I go any further, let me introduce myself. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and the Umoja Circle purpose is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. And in order to make a shift in consciousness, I've always believed to change that world, there must be a shift in consciousness. And through dialogue is one of the ways that that shift can happen. And what I try to do through the show is dialogue with you, the audience, and show facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. Now, before I go further, I'm going to start with a little video clip I would like for you to listen to by Professor Molefi Kente Asante, professor at Temple University, and he's going to introduce today's topic.
Homo sapiens are not 14 billion years old as Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens are not 5 billion years old. That is, at the time of the earth, there were no, at the beginning of the earth, there were no Homo sapiens. We didn't exist. Homo sapiens, we say, are anatomically modern humans. That's a human being like we are, like everybody listening today. That's what a Homo sapien is. We all Homo sapiens. Now, here's the thing about Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens really arose only in one continent, and that continent was Africa. Now, this is really important to understand this being human being. Because Homo sapiens rose in Africa, that's around 300,000 years ago. All scientists will say that. They will tell you, well, Homo sapiens, the beginning of Homo sapiens is about 300,000 years ago. Well, there were human-like creatures before Homo sapiens, and we've heard many of these names. The oldest one, of course, was Sahelanthropus chadensis. Sahelanthropus chadensis was discovered in Chad. That's why it's Chadensis. Chad is a country in the middle of Africa. They found the fossil remains of a being that was 7.2 million years old. The oldest discovery of what would be a being, a hominin. A hominin is something on the pathway to humanity, to Homo sapiens. But Homo sapiens we've only found evidence of Homo sapiens that go back to 300,000 years ago. And only in Africa. In fact, Sahelanthropus chadensis, the oldest fossil, the oldest hominin fossil, also was discovered only in Africa. Now, it's very important to say this because the question of human beings was raised by the people who introduced this whole idea of what they call polygenesis. Polygenesis means many origins, many origins. Genesis, origin or beginning. during the time of the enslavement of Africans in the United States and other places, there was a theory that Africans could not be the same as Europeans. So there had to be a creation of humanity in different parts of the world. That there's some people who were from Asia, and there was a beginning in Asia, a beginning in Europe, and a beginning in Africa, because we're too different, could not be the same. Well, interestingly enough, in the 1980s, two researchers, and then began many other researchers. And then after that, of course, the creators of the Human Genome Project discovered something very interesting. And that is, they discovered that all human beings around the world have the DNA that traces back to one African woman in East Africa. That essentially the 7 billion people on the earth today come from one source. So it's not polygenesis, it is monogenesis. It's one beginning. And we all go back to that 300,000 years or so old woman whose children and children's 1,000 generations or more were in fact the very ones who populated the earth. That's science.
Welcome back. I hope you find the little bit of a video that I presented would feed your mind to want to understand more. And that's what I'm going to try to do with this show. If you don't know who Dr. Asante is, he wrote about 70 books. I'm going to show 2 of the books that he wrote. This is one of his most famous works, The History of Africa. And there's another one I have, African Pyramids Knowledge, the African Pyramid Knowledge. Again, he wrote over 70 books, so he knows what he speaks. Again, he's the director of, professor at Temple University, the African History Department. His department was one of the first departments to offer a doctorate's degree in African studies. So this brother is well knowledgeable, and he's world renowned. You also have a Dr. Molefi Asante, Kete Asante institution, where he does research in topics like the topics I'm going to talk about. Now, I want to show you some of his, at least 2 of his 70 books that he's written, but the book that I'm going to be basing my talk on, my conversation on, my discussion on, is this book here, The Myth of Race. And why did I take this? Because there seemed to be, there's still, last month, I talked about a word that called a German word, I used a German word called Zeitgeist. That's the ideas of the age, the ideas of how a people think during a particular period of time. And this is one of the ideas that needs to be changed when we talk about biracial or black race or white race. What this is done, this book was done by Robert Wall Sussman. I have a picture of him. He's passed not too long ago, but he's an anthropologist who also, like Dr. Molefi Asante or Sheikh Anta Diop and some of the other, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, some of the other scholars I've used, he wanted to understand the origins of who we are as human beings. And he wrote this book called The Myth of Races. And what he's trying to say, you know, in America, race has always shaped the concept of democracy or culture or citizenship. here. Race seemed to permeate everything. The white race, which has always seemed to be on top, coincidentally, during the 500 years that established enslavement by white Europeans. And the concept of racism, this is an offshoot of enslavement, that we somehow are different categories of people. That came from, again, these gentlemen who, and I'm going to talk about them later on, who were the foundational thinkers in the 1700s and the 1800s, who established this zeitgeist of inferiority and classifications that we still use today. But it's all based on lies. And that's the topic of the show. And that's what is in this book and many other books. But this is a book that you might want to read if you want to get more information on what I'm talking about. So let's start off. Let's go back about 200,000, 300,000 years. I got an image here that I want to start the discussion from. This is the, I want to give you a little synopsis or tell you what's in that book. With the myth of race, Robert Sussman gives us a comprehensive history of the idea of race, and particularly the rise and not total fall of scientific racism, drawing on the intellectual history of his own discipline, physical anthropology. Sussman takes the reader on a journey from the role of race in the religious persecution of the 15th century, Spanish Inquisition, to an examination of the development of the eugenics movement, which we also going to talk about a little bit. Okay, and the only reason, again, the eugenics movement stopped in the 1940s was because of a gentleman by the name of Adolf Hitler took it a little bit far, this eugenic of the superior race, this idea of the superior race. But it was very popular within the 18th and 19th century of something, and it happened to be white people, which is a myth. Okay, let's go on and take this journey. The sciences today, and I'm going to talk about this in the first show to deal with this concept of race. In the 1980s, when they started doing studies on the genome, and when they came up with another theory of epigenetics, okay? These are two scientific. What I'm going to talk about is what the science knows today, not the myth that we are still working on about separate race. There's a theory that came out in the 1800s of polygenetics. In other words, multiple origins, that these to bolster the foundation of the fact that there were multiple races. That way, this kind of racist concept that, you know, the Asian race was separately developed, the white race was separately developed, and the poor African and native people here in America were separately developed as polygenetics. But since the 80s, when they did a mitochondrial DNA through the female line, they found that all human beings came from the motherland of Africa. And they could trace by mitochondrial DNA, which is found in the female egg, in the ovum of the female. They could trace back using women from many parts of the world, and they traced that mitochondrial DNA to a black woman millions of years ago, okay? Or let's just say the hominids were millions of years ago. The first human beings were developed about 300,000 years ago, and they looked like this brother. There should be a female there, but this is the picture I got of some of the early Homo sapiens sapien. Homo sapiens sapien is us. Before the Homo sapiens sapien, there was hominids. These were the precursors to the human that we are, okay? Those hominids go back, like Lucy, millions of years. The oldest is found, again, in Africa, in Chad. So let's go to the next slide. I want to move on. Africans are the earliest people that look like me, and many of you out there are the earliest looking form of humankind, Homo sapiens sapiens. This is not hyperbole. This is scientific fact. The only thing that makes us different is the skin tone. Okay, that's what the myth came in. That somehow skin tone, the color of the skin, make you a separate race. No, there's only one race, the human race, and it was established on the continent of Africa. Let's go to the next slide there. About 200,000 to 300,000 years. This map shows the spreading of Homo sapien out of Africa. Now, they didn't go in one large mass. It was maybe family groups of 100 or 12 that started in Africa. And again, a lot of Homo sapiens stayed in Africa, okay? But there were some, and maybe one of the hominids and the Cro-Magnon man went up into the rest of the earth. For 300,000 years is when they came into being, Homo sapiens. Let me make this point. For 220,000 years, there was nobody else on this planet but people in that red area. We see that concentrated in red, that's Africa. Okay, it wasn't until about 70,000 to 80,000, the numbers vary, some even say 100,000 years ago, that these humans started going through the rest of the planet. Scientifically, this is scientific fact. Anthropologists know that, all physiologists know that. This is part of today's, and the genome tells you that, and the epigenetic theory tells you that. Okay, so let's go. All dark-skinned humans. I've showed this picture to show the variation. These are all people from the continent of Africa. You got to understand that every human being on this earth can trace themselves back to people that look like that, even if you're considered yourself white. It might trip you out by me saying that, but this is a fact. And the only place on the planet that you can find every variety of human being DNA is on the planet, on the continent of Africa. That's scientifically proven. Okay, every last one of those people you see there has every DNA type that can be found all over this world. Comes from people that look like that. The only difference is the melanated skin, okay? And there's a reason why you have dark-skinned, melanated people in the early forms of humankind. Let's go on to the next one. You can see this image here. I wanted to show you that even black-skinned people, and you could talk to Mendel's law, recessive genes or dominant genes. Black-skinned people can produce white-skinned people, or demelanated, as the scientists call it, individuals. Look at these cute twins. These are black twins. Okay? Cute. Next one. These are twins. Okay, but you can't have demelanated people producing melanated people. According to Mendel's law, one is recessive, one is dominant. The genome shows that. The earliest people were African. The earliest people were melanated. And the reason they got demelanated wasn't because of inferiority. It's about adaptation to the environment that they found themselves in after they left Africa 80,000 years ago. About 12,000 years ago, there was a period called the Pleistocene. The Pleistocene period was the last ice age. That ended about 12 to 13,000 years ago. That's when the ice started receding. The Holocene is the next age. This is the age we're in, this temperate age. So from 70,000 to 12,000 years ago, when those people were going up into northern climates, some of them got caught up in an ice age. This is scientific. This is not hyperbole. I'm not making up. This is not myth. This is scientific. You could read many different studies that prove what I say. Don't believe me. This is another image of demelanated people, that's what I call them, who were born from black parents. Again, let's go on to the next one. Here again. This is what Dr. Sussman was telling us. This is what a lot of scientists have been telling us. This is what Sheikh Anta Diop told us back in the 50s and 60s. This is what Dr. Malefi has been telling people since the 70s and 80s. That the earliest form, Dr. Clark, that the earliest human beings were melanated. And there's a reason why that we became this way. And I'll go into more details in the next show. Okay, let's go to this one here. Now, the reason I put her up there, many of you might be familiar with this lady. She's been an advocate against racism since she was a school teacher in Iowa. Her name is Jane Elliott, and she's in her 90s now, but she's been a fierce advocate against racism. And the reason I have an image here, because she always made an example of what I'm talking about, that there's only one race, the human race. When we say biracial, that's a lie. There's only the human race. And one of the examples that I always like to use by this lady, well, let me give you a little background about her. In 1968, she was a school teacher in Iowa, teaching elementary school kids. And she usually liked to do history where they reenact certain kinds of times in American history. Okay, typical white woman, been taught by the system. And then she saw what happened on April 4th in 1968 when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And it shook her. This is what she says. And she wanted to do something she just got angry at this racist type of world that was going on in the 60s. She saw what happened in Alabama and in Mississippi. So she was aware of this problem of racism, voting problems, discrimination. And she wanted to teach her white children what it felt like to be ostracized and categorized simply based on whether you are melanated or demelanated, which are not scientific at all, but pseudoscience that came out of the 17th and 1800s. And we're still dealing with remnants of that kind of zeitgeist ideas to this day when we talk about white race and black race and Asian race and all that. So what she did was the brown-eyed, blue-eyed test, that they were all white students. And those students with blue eyes, the typical Aryan type looking students, she treated them as she expected black people was treated. And the kids with brown eyes were put in the position that white America was put in there. And that experiment was the brown-eyed, blue-eyed experiment, and her kids got a good lesson. And she was doing that throughout the years ever since. And one of her programs, she did this thing that I thought was very powerful to prove a point. She first asked the audience, a big auditorium, she first asked the audience that anybody who is of the white race stand up. And of course, white people in the audience, was in a college campus. Anybody who consider themselves of the black race stand up. And of course, people will stand up. who are considered black and Asian and so forth. And then she said something really powerful. She said, who all consider themselves human beings of the human race, sit down. And everybody sat down as one. And it jarred them to realize that somehow their conditioned response, that they were somehow separate when she first asked the question, but everybody sat down as one, intuitively knowing they were part of one race, the human race. And ever since I saw her do that, I always considered her an ally. And she is an ally. We've had white allies throughout the centuries here in America, and we must understand that fact. There's only one race, and America needs to come to that conclusion. This concept of separate races or separation is a racist, come out of a racist system that had to justify enslavement. It's only been around for the last 500 years or so. And we got to stop it. We got to stop it now. We have to understand that we are not separate. When I see a black person who is a white parent and a black parent, and they call themselves biracial, that's a lie. There's only one race, and it started in Africa 300,000 years ago, and that's the human race. Homo sapiens sapien. They came melanated. Why? I'll go into that in the next part 2 of this discussion, because of nature, UV light. But until then, we just wait till part 2 of this, and I'll continue. So until next time, peace, Hotep, bye-bye.